Hey friends, come on in. We are going to get started right away today. Today we are making a butternut squash and chickpea coconut curry. This is a really delicious plant-based one-pot meal that I know you're going to love. Today is definitely going to be shorter than last week. Last week we went about 50 minutes and today I plan on going about 30. I've got clients today. Today's a client day. So it's definitely not going to be as long and I'm excited about that because that means I can share with you like a real life meal that's going to take you about a half an hour, probably less, because you won't be gabbing while you are cooking. So I have all of my ingredients laid out in front of me. So I'm gonna go ahead and just jump right in. I know you guys are gonna jump in as I'm talking. So I'll share with you the ingredients I'm gonna use, and as we cook, you're welcome to ask me questions. I'll do my best to kind of check in and see if there's any questions coming up, or you're welcome, if you're watching this later, to ask me questions later about the recipe, about something I do in the kitchen. I'm very happy to share with you. There's not gonna be any chopping today, but I'm also gonna share with you a couple tips for do's and don'ts when it comes to seasoning your food. We're not gonna talk about salt seasoning today. We're mostly gonna talk about spices because we're gonna use a whole bunch of delicious spices in this really easy butternut squash chickpea coconut curry. That is a mouthful. Apparently many of my recipes are mouthfuls. They're delicious mouthfuls too, huh? Okay, you guys, so let's get going. I'm gonna go ahead and share with you the ingredients to start and then we'll get cooking. Okay, so what do we need? I always have my recipe next to me just in case I forget something. So it is a butternut squash, chickpea, coconut curry. So we need butternut squash, chickpeas, curry powder, and the like. Let's start. We've got onion. So this is just one onion chopped. Last week I shared with you how to chop an onion without crying for days. So you can go back and listen and watch kind of the first part of last week's if you're curious about how to chop an onion. I talked about that last week. So we have one onion, one small onion. We have about 2 cloves of garlic. Now I have 3 here because they're pretty little. So we're gonna go ahead and do some garlic in there. You can also add some fresh ginger if you'd like. I do that sometimes. It's not in the original recipe, but it is delicious. I don't have any on hand right now. I used the last of it last night for dinner. So you're gonna need some spices as well. So I'm kind of sharing with you the ingredients in the order I'm gonna be cooking them in because the order is really important. So I've got my onion, I've got my garlic. I'm gonna cook that up in a little bit of coconut oil, but you can use whatever oil you want. I like the flavor of extra virgin coconut oil in this recipe. If you use refined coconut oil, it won't have the same flavor, but it'll work as well. So in terms of spices over here, obviously we're gonna need a little bit of salt. We are gonna use some curry powder, whatever curry powder you've got, some cumin, some coriander, cardamom. This is like the secret ingredient. If you don't already use cardamom in your kitchen, you're gonna start using it now. It is so, so good. And some black pepper. Anything but the curry can be left out if you would like. It's not gonna be as delicious, but it'll still be good, I promise. You're gonna need some chickpeas. I am going to be using about 2 cans worth. So if you are not using canned and you are using cooked, well, they're both cooked, but if you are using the kind that you cook yourself, about 1.5 cups is equal to about 1 can of chickpeas. You can do this with 1 can of chickpeas, or you can do it with 2. You just might want to add a little bit more liquid because I want some leftovers from this one. We're going to use about 2 cans worth, so about 3 cups of chickpeas. You're also going to want about 3 cups of butternut squash or a similar squash. So listen, today I am actually going to be using frozen squash because raw squash tends to take a little bit longer to cook. And since we want this to happen fast, this is my hack today. I'm using frozen squash. Frozen vegetables are just as healthy and oftentimes a lot easier to cook than fresh vegetables. Just because they've already been frozen, they're oftentimes pre-cooked as well, and you just throw them in the pan and they cook up a lot quicker. So that's what I'm gonna be using today, and this is just gonna sit out for about, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes as I'm talking, and it'll start to defrost just a little bit as well. I just pulled it out from the freezer. You're also gonna need some, I'm gonna try not to spill this on myself, coconut milk, canned coconut milk. I recommend using the canned coconut milk, not the kind that you get like with the almond milk and the cashew milk. It's just not as creamy. I like the full fat because it is the most creamy and the most delicious. You could also use light if you like, or you can use coconut cream and just water it down a bit with water. You're gonna want some sort of a broth. Now I have chicken broth because we eat all types of foods, but if you want this totally vegan, just use a veggie broth. You could also use a bit of water if you want, but I like the flavor of a bit of veggie broth. And then kale. You guys have seen me use these before. These are the OXO produce savers. I have a video coming out next week sharing with you my meal prep favorites when it comes to containers. My meal prep container favorites. This is one of them as well, these like Pyrex containers. So I love these because it keeps my kale nice and fresh. So I've got some chopped kale there as well. So I recommend you pre-chopping all of your ingredients and pre-measuring, which is what we're gonna do with the spices in just a minute, before you start cooking, because you wanna make sure you've got your mise en place done. I talked a little bit about mise en place last time, and I've talked about it before. Mise en place is a French term that means everything in its place. When you have everything ready to go, everything comes together a lot faster. Now, I have not grated the garlic yet. I'm gonna do that now while I talk to you guys about spices, and then we're gonna get going with our cooking. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna get the onions on right now just so they start to cook. I'm gonna start to preheat my pan over here. I've got my hot plate over here just to make it a little bit easier for you to see what I'm doing. I'm gonna put in about a tablespoon of coconut oil to start. Again, you can use whatever oil you would like here. You could use avocado oil, you can use olive oil. Ooh, hello. I just like the flavor of coconut oil. I'm do about, I will use my fingers for this one because it's my dinner I'm cooking. And favorite kitchen trick. Coconut oil is so good for your skin. I don't use it, I wouldn't use it on your face. It works as a good makeup remover, but it's great for your hands. So there we go. We're moisturizing and we're also cooking. And if you find that weird, you're gonna find the rest of me totally weird. So, all right, we're gonna go ahead and we're just going to, I'm just gonna swirl that around so it coats the bottom of the pan. And I realized I forgot a spatula, so I'm gonna go grab a spatula. Any sort of wooden spatula works really well here. And I'm gonna go ahead and grate my garlic. I'm using my favorite microplane grater. I waxed poetic about this last week and also this week when I was sharing some of my kitchen essentials for meal prep. Speaking of meal prep, I can't forget to mention, you guys, those of you who are interested in learning a meal prep method that is going to feel simple and not feel like it's adding extra time to your life, but actually bringing more time back into your evening so you can do the things you actually want to do. My course, Healthy Mama Meal Prep, which shares my signature 3-style meal prep process. You choose which style works for you. You're not going to learn 3 different styles. You're going to find which one works for you and your family rather than trying to meal prep in a way that works for someone else's family but might not work for yours. It is on sale right now through the end of the month, through October 31st. If you use the code PREP20, the link is in my bio and the code is there too, you get 20% off, which is like $30. It's almost $30, like $29.80, which is a really good deal. And that's just through the end of the month because I'm celebrating relaunching it. It's been around for 3 years, but I just completely updated and expanded the whole thing. So if you are around here and you are not already a part of Healthy Mama Meal Prep, you're gonna want to get in on that. All right, I'm gonna grab a little knife over here just to get the last little bit of this garlic out here. And let's talk about spices really quick. Let's talk about a couple do's and don'ts when it comes to spices. It looks like my coconut oil is nice and hot over here. I'm gonna add my onion in there. Do's and don'ts when it comes to spices. Let's start with a couple don'ts and then we'll end with a positive. We'll end with a couple do's. Okay, when it comes to adding spices to your food, here's your number one. You do not want to do this, okay? You do not want to take your spices and put them over, don't worry, it's not open, and put it over your hot pan. Why is that? Does anyone know? It's because your pan, whatever you're cooking, is releasing moisture into the air. And you're gonna get all that moisture up in your spices. And that is not only gonna degrade the flavor of the spices, that's like the worst thing as a chef. It's like, no, don't ruin my spices. It's going to degrade your spices. It is also going to make them clumpy. So we don't wanna do that. We want to, your do, so your don't is don't toss it over the top. Your do is you want to measure out your spices ahead of time, okay? Your second don't is we don't put your spices in at the end. The aromatic qualities of your spices or the aromatic compounds of your spices are what are going to give your meal the most flavor. And they need time to release and to meld into whatever you're cooking. They need time to absorb into the different ingredients that you're cooking. So you want to start with your spices at the beginning, as much as possible. So that's your do. Put your spices in at the beginning. And the second part of that do is toast your spices. If it's available, you want to toast your spices because that's going to start bringing out those aromatic qualities that are going to help to flavor your dish. You eat with your nose first. Oh, I guess people say you eat with your eyes first. I guess you do, but there are some not so delicious looking dishes that are fabulous. You really eat with your nose first. You smell the food. That's how you first start enjoying the flavor of food. That's why because everything's connected, right? Anatomy. So when you don't have a sense of smell, when you've got a cold or something like that, food just doesn't taste good. It's because it's all connected. But the same thing goes when something smells really delicious. It means it's got a lot of flavor. If you're just kind of tossing your spices in at the end, you are missing out on so much flavor potential. And as your friend and chef, I do not want you missing out on flavor potential, okay? We're all about the flavors around here. So over here, I am just cooking my onion. I'm tossing it around more than I normally would. I oftentimes tell my cooking students, you leave your food alone. You really want to give your food an opportunity to cook. The more you move it around, the more opportunity there is for it to come off of the pan, and then it's not being cooked that way, right? So you want to make sure that you are giving it time to cook, but I have this up pretty darn high because I want this to happen fast. So now that my onion is it's translucent in color, I'm going to add my garlic, and I'm just going to let that cook for like 10 to 15 seconds. I'm just using the same spoon with the coconut oil. I will also coat the garlic a little bit in oil. All right. And then I'm going to measure out my spices over here. Okay, so I mentioned the spices we're going to use. We're going to start with curry powder. Now, every curry powder is different. Curry is a blend of different spices. So, most popular in Indian food dishes, but saying Indian food doesn't even give Indian food justice because they're just like in the US, just like in Europe, it's like saying European food. That's not a thing. There are many different regions in India, so there are different types of curry powder. I'm just using it says traditional Indian curry, which is probably I'm not that well versed in Indian food, but kind of like the American version of curry. But find a curry powder that you love and know that there are different types of curry powders. Some are spicier than others, but this is just a turmeric based, so a yellow curry powder. Not to be confused with garam masala, which is a different Indian spice blend, which is also delicious, but we're not using it in this dish. So I'm gonna add about a tablespoon to my cute little bowl here. Just looking at this garlic over here, making sure my garlic doesn't brown. This is huge, you guys. If this is something you're doing on the regular and you're like, my dishes always kind of taste a bit funky. Garlic turns bitter when it browns, just like butter. So some things you want browned, like steak. Some things you do not want browned, like garlic. And sometimes you do want brown butter, so that's kind of it depends. It depends on what you want out of it. All right, we're gonna add some cumin. Add about a teaspoon of cumin. Oh no. We're gonna measure it out over here. Oops, and we're measuring loosely around here. Because let's be real, I don't do a lot of measuring. I do a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and then I have to go back and measure so I can make sure that I have the recipe written down for all of you. And then about a teaspoon of coriander. You guys know cilantro. Coriander is the cilantro root. It's a little bit sweeter than cumin. It's like cumin's sister. It's a little bit different. Cumin's a little bit more savory. Coriander's a little bit sweeter. And then we've got the star. Seriously, you're only gonna use a little bit because it's very strong, but cardamom. So good. I have a recipe in the Healthy Mama Meal Prep Cookbook for coconut cardamom. All right, adding this to the pan. Coconut cardamom energy balls. This is only a recipe that I've only ever released that recipe to cooking class clients, and it was also in the Healthy Mama Meal Planner free cookbook at the beginning of last year. But that's not kind of like a secret Healthy Mama Kris recipe, and it's really good. So if there's one reason to buy the Healthy Mama Meal Prep Cookbook, by the way, it's free with the course. You can buy it separately if you want. If you're like, I just want some recipes, and you can get the cookbook. This month it's only 25 bucks. $24.99, and you can also use the code preview20 for $10 off. So you can get it for 15 bucks. That's a crazy good deal. There's over 100 recipes in it. But that those coconut cardamom balls, they are so good. Okay, so let's talk about, I'm gonna stop talking about coconut cardamom balls and talk to you about this really delicious spice blend. So I'm mixing it around, I'm toasting it. When you can start to smell the spices, that's when they're done being toasted. That's when we can start to add the other ingredients. Now, next thing we're gonna add, our chickpeas. Why are we adding our chickpeas next? Because we want to coat the chickpeas. There was a little bit of water left in there, that's why it's sizzling. We wanna coat the chickpeas with those spices. So good. This is also the point where I'm going to add some salt. I want to remind you too to be moderate about salt if you are using a broth that has salt in it, that has sodium in it, because you don't want to oversalt your food. Less is more. How much do I say in the recipe? To taste. I try to give measurements for salt, but sometimes it's honestly just the taste. So I'm going to do a big old sprinkle of salt. We're going to talk about salt soon and how to season your food in terms of salt and different types of salt, because I love me some salt, but we want to use it in the right way. We want to use it in the most gentle way possible. So I'm just coating my chickpeas with my spices over here. It's looking good. And then I'm going to add my butternut squash. We're not adding the kale yet. This is really important. You want to add the kale at the end, otherwise the kale is gonna get a little bit icky. All right, don't do this at home. Use scissors, it's safer. Okay, these are little pieces of squash, you can see. So they're gonna cook up a lot faster. So this is key. When we talk about knife skills, it's really important to cut things about the same size, because that means it's going to cook at about the same rate. Especially if you're roasting something or if you're sauteing something, you don't want to have one thing that's like really hard and one part of your dish that's really, like a hard piece of butternut squash and then a super squishy one. You want it all to be about the same level. So it's really important that we're cutting things to about the same size, which I mean is kind of a toss-up when you're talking about frozen veggies. Sometimes I find I buy a bag of frozen broccoli from Trader Joe's or Whole Foods or whatever, and it's like, oh, everything's like perfectly even. And then there are some of them where it's like, well, here's half a head and here's like one tiny floret. So you just got to kind of judge your broccoli. And if you're doing it yourself, it becomes very easy to just work on your knife skills and work on cutting things to about the same size. All right, so I just mixed this all up, and you can't really, I'm gonna show you. The butternut squash is mixing up with these spices and the onion and the chickpeas, and it is already starting to cook. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and add my coconut milk. I'm gonna add about, yeah, I have a cup here. Yeah. So it's like half a can-ish. If you want it creamier and you're using extra chickpeas especially, add more. You do you. If you are, I should also mention too, if you are using bigger pieces of squash, not only will it take a little bit longer to cook, but the smaller pieces are also gonna dissolve more and create kind of a creamier curry. Whereas, and I'm gonna add some broth to this too, whereas your bigger pieces are gonna create more of a, I don't wanna use the word because I know people are gonna be like, don't use that word, chunky. I'm using it, I did it. All right, we're gonna add about a cup-ish of broth. Here's the deal, guys. Cooking is an art. And baking is a science, which is why I don't do a ton of baking. Even though I love science, it's a different kind of science. Baking stresses me out a little bit. There's so much leniency and leeway to cooking. I want you to get in the kitchen, and I want cooking to feel like a like poetic expression. Somebody just shut this off right now because they're like, what is this chick talking about? But I really want cooking to feel like something that's easy for you and doesn't feel super hard, doesn't feel super stressful. And there are gonna be those times, okay? There was a couple nights ago, I had everything meal prepped and ready to go because I practice what I preach. I have things ready to go, and my style of meal prep is I'm very much a flexible foodie. When you hear me talk about the different meal prep styles and the meal prep personalities, I am a flexible foodie, which means my favorite meal prep style is ingredient prep. So I just prep ingredients ahead of time, and then I can mix and match them and use them throughout the week. By the way, we're just letting this simmer, and we're gonna taste it in a second and add kale once that squash is cooked. So, well, with that, I'm a flexible foodie. I really like to have a lot of flexibility with my ingredients and with my cooking and be able to change things around. And really my hope for you in teaching you some of these skills is that you feel comfortable and confident in the kitchen, mixing things up, changing things up a little bit, adding a little bit more spices here and there when you're like, it's not quite right, and be able to know how to pair things together and how to taste as you go. This is so huge. This is something I demonstrate a lot but don't always mention. It's really important to taste as you go instead of dumping everything at once. Obviously, we're following a recipe, so we dumped in all the spices, but I just did a little bit of salt. I haven't even added any pepper. We'll go ahead and add a little bit of that now. Little nutrition fact, too. Black pepper helps to increase the anti-inflammatory benefits of turmeric, so it's always nice to use black pepper, not just for the flavor, but for the health benefits with turmeric, too. Fun fact. So it's important to taste as you go. It's important to just learn different flavor combinations. Learn your favorite flavor combinations, learn your favorite spices, and learn which ones go together. It does not have to be hard, and there are very few rules when it comes to cooking. Really, there are very few rules when it comes to cooking, and that's why I love it, because I'm a little bit of a rebel, and I really like being able to experiment and try new things myself, and I want you to feel the same way. So in a couple weeks, I'm definitely gonna come on and talk a little bit more specifically about how to pair spices together and how to pair flavors together, because it goes beyond knife skills. So knife skills and are really gonna help you become more efficient in the kitchen, which is just gonna make things so much easier. It's gonna help with meal prep. It's gonna help with getting dinner on the table in a time that's reasonable, really knowing those knife skills. And that's why I added a whole module to my course about skills, cooking skills, because I think that these are really important so that you do feel comfortable and confident in the kitchen, because nobody wants to do something that they don't feel comfortable with. It's just harder. You're like, okay, especially if it's something you have to do. We're like, we've got to cook at some point. I mean, we can eat takeout every night if we want to, but most of us, our budgets call for cooking at home sometimes. And especially if you want to learn how to eat, in a way that really feels good to you, home cooked meals are the way it's at, or where it's at, right? So being able to be more confident and to know what goes together and to be like, okay, I know how to tweak this and I don't feel like I'm gonna ruin the entire dish. It starts with learning how to just make little tweaks at a time, learning what goes together, and really tasting as you go and experimenting and being okay with sometimes things are gonna be a little bit of a flop and sometimes you're gonna hit it out of the park, like my 7-year-old likes to tell me. You guys know that a recipe makes it to the blog if my 7-year-old says, Mama, you hit it out of the park. She doesn't even know what that means, which is why it's even cuter. I'm gonna taste, because we taste as we go, and right now we have a delicious creamy sauce because that butternut squash just melted in there. It's good, but it needs so much more salt. We only added a little bit. All right. I don't think it needs any more pepper. We're gonna taste it again though. So I added double the amount of chickpeas. If you're hopping on, then the recipe says, which I will post after to my stories, by the way. The recipe says 1 can of chickpeas, but I don't find that's quite enough for all 4 of us. If my kids decide to eat it, because, this week, it's been a week. It was a week of family favorites, and also the week my kids decided they were no longer family favorites. Ever have those weeks? That's why we switch things up, and we have seasonal family favorites, and we consult with the kiddos on a regular basis. What kind of foods are you liking? What kind of foods are you enjoying? I'm double dipping because this is my dinner. I'm not cooking this for anyone else. Well, I'm cooking it for you guys, but I can't share it with you guys right now. Mm-hmm. Okay, that is good. That is so good. I know it's my recipe, but I can still say it's good, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. Because there's more chickpeas, we're gonna add a little bit more curry. Because when you add more, you need a little more. And we're gonna add more cumin. And I just did it. I just put it over it like I told you that you're not supposed to. I'm not perfect, and I will never ever claim to be. Sometimes I'm just not thinking. And you know, it is what it is. I'm gonna add a little bit more cumin. I'm gonna add a little bit more curry. And what, you know what we're gonna do? Add a little bit more cardamom. But cardamom is honestly, it's the star. It's like the star of cooking in general. If you've never used cardamom, you are in for a treat. It is not like crazy expensive like saffron or anything like that, so you can pick it up next time you're at the grocery store if you don't use it already. I find it is one of those like very underused spices. So we're gonna let the flavors meld a little bit here, and I'm gonna grab my kale, and that's gonna be my last step. Actually, let me go ahead and show you what this looks like now, because like I said, it's gonna look, mine's gonna look a little bit different because I used the frozen squash, and they were very small pieces, so they just sort of melted in to this like creamy butternut squash sauce, which is so tasty. Ooh, there we go. And if you're using bigger pieces, then you can go ahead and either let it cook longer to get this sort of effect, or there might just be slightly bigger pieces. So I just have torn kale here, and I'm just tearing it up a little bit more as I add it in here. I'm actually gonna turn down my element over here. All right, do we have any questions as I put these in? Not yet, it doesn't look like it. Sometimes I miss questions, so I always apologize when I'm cooking. I'm trying to make sure I don't burn the house down. So I try to answer questions as I go. But if you guys have any questions about spices, the kind of do's and don'ts about spices I mentioned, things like don't do the thing where you pour the spices over the top, measure them ahead of time, toast your spices, don't put them in at the end. Oh, my last don't when it comes to spices, do and don't together, is don't let your spices live in your cupboard for 36 years. Or 2 years. Or really any years. Most spices last about 6 to 12 months. I used all of it. It says, the recipe says 2 cups, and I say however much kale you would like to use. So I'm just gonna stir this in and just until it wilts, and then we're done, and dinner is done for tonight. Woohoo! Yeah, so you wanna make sure that you are switching out your spices. It's kind of like with your closet. You know how a lot of experts who recommend, you know, paring down your closet, and you guys know, if you have ever been on a live with me before, I have a very curated, we'll call it curated, like I'm fancy. Now I have a very small closet. I wear a lot of the same clothes over and over again because I'd rather spend my money on food. No, and I'd rather have less decisions. So one of the pieces of advice I took kind of when I was working on minimizing my closet, and I'm gonna add a tiny bit more salt, by the way, to this, just because I added the kale. Remember, add an ingredient, you wanna add more seasoning. So one of the pieces of advice I took was to turn all your hangers around. Also, not a minimalism or the clothing expert. That's my sister's the clothing expert. She has a degree in fashion. She doesn't dress me, just in case she watches this and gets embarrassed and is like, oh no, she outed me. It's funny, my mom and my little one are upstairs, and I wonder if they can hear me talking about my sister having way better fashion sense than I do. But one of the pieces of advice when I was minimizing was to turn your hangers around, and then at the end of like 6 months or a year, if you haven't, or at the end of a season, I think I did 6 months, if you haven't turned your hangers back around because you've worn them, then to just donate them. And I did that and got rid of like half my clothes. So I'm like, I don't wear any of these things. Why am I still keeping them around? Same thing with your spices. If they're not gone by the end of the year, throw them away. And I don't normally recommend wasting food. If they're unopened, you could still keep them and use them. But if you don't use them, curate your spices. Keep the ones on hand that you use. You don't need 300 different spices. You need the ones that you're actually going to use, and you need to actually use them, because they're the #1 key to making your food delicious. All right, you guys, It's done, and it is 1:59, which means this is a 30-minute dinner, even with my talking, even with my gabbing. Oh my gosh, so good. So good. Let me just check for a couple more questions. I think we're good. Now is where you see me just eat my dinner right now. At 2 o'clock. So good. And this is just gonna get better with time, as it sits, as it simmers. If you want to change it up, you can change up the spices. You can add more salt if the amount that I put in is not right for you. You can add more coconut milk if you want it a little bit less thick. This one's pretty thick. Sky's the limit with this one. It is just a really delicious, simple recipe that you can change up to fit your fancy. All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope this was helpful. I've got clients, so I'm gonna hop off and go switch into intuitive eating counselor mode. I hope you guys all have a beautiful Thursday. Thank you so much for joining me today. And if you're joining me later, thank you again for staying a half an hour and joining me. I'm so thrilled to have you here. I love chatting, cooking with you guys. And if you guys have any suggestions for future Cook with Kris's, where there's a specific dish you want to cook, a skill you want to learn, please go ahead. Let me know in my feed. Shoot me a DM. I'm happy to share with you guys. We're going to be back next week. And next week, I'm going to take you through kind of a balance bowl tutorial. So how I make balance bowls, power bowls, Buddha bowls, whatever you want to call them, how to make them and how to make them taste really, really delicious. All right, guys, I'm going to hop off and I'll talk to you guys soon.